Chomsky and Skinner, The Great Debate About Language Acquisition, produced and narrated by Angela Elkan and Mary Faye Jackson.
In the 1920s, behaviorists were continuously coming up with explanations for why humans learn, behave, and interact in the complex way that they do. One of the greatest debates in the history of psychology began in 1957 between a man named Burris Frederick Skinner, more commonly known as B.F. Skinner, and a man named Noam Chomsky.
This short movie will give you a quick background on who these two influential psychologists are still to this day, and will delve into their opposing arguments on how developing humans acquire one of our most unique characteristics, verbal language. Alright, time to introduce you to the first character of our story.
Skinner was a behaviorist who believed that observable behavior was the most productive way to determine how we learn, rather than focusing on internal events and thoughts. He believed that the action and its consequences were the most important aspects of behavior, in which he called operant conditioning.
Like every other great psychologist, Skinner was influenced by the work done by other great psychologists. Skinner's views were less extreme than John B. Watson's, who was known to have created an anti-mentalism, radical belief about behavior and learning. Watson and his little Albert experiments were early examples of classical conditioning.
Skinner was also heavily influenced by a man named Edward Thorndike, who proposed the law of effect. Skinner's operant conditioning work was primarily based on the law of effect.
The law of effect simply stated that when a response was followed by a pleasurable consequence, that response would be repeated. Skinner embellished his theory by using the word reinforcement.
When a behavior is reinforced, it will be repeated in the future. Skinner demonstrated how positive and negative reinforcement occurred, as well as positive and negative punishment.
To demonstrate positive reinforcement, he placed a hungry rat in a box with a lever. Pressing the lever, the response, was reinforced by gaining access to food, the consequence. Therefore, the rat continued to press the lever.
Negative reinforcement was demonstrated by pairing an unpleasant stimulus, an electrical shock, with the lever. When the electrical shock was on, the rat pressed the lever and was able to escape the shock. The removal of an unpleasant stimulus is what causes the lever pressing to be increased.
The primary assumptions that behaviorism makes are: behaviorism can be studied under controlled conditions like the Skinner box. It is primarily concerned with observable behavior rather than internal thoughts. Learning from our environment is a major influence on acquisition of behavior, and there is little difference between learning that takes place between other animals and humans. We will soon find out how Skinner applied these assumptions to development and acquisition of language.
Time to talk about our second participant, Noam Chomsky. Chomsky is sometimes described as the father of modern linguistics and a founder of the field of cognitive science. He obtained his PhD from the University of Pennsylvania and was a longtime professor at MIT. Chomsky has published works on linguistics and U.S. foreign policy.
Chomsky received his PhD in linguistics, which means that his focus of study was specifically language. He is most known for his controversial beliefs of the development of language, in which his primary theory is called the universal grammar theory.
The universal grammar theory states that human beings are born with an ability to develop language because of an innate knowledge of grammatical properties and structure.
Chomsky believed there were a set of mental constraints that dictated the way which individuals learning a specific language acknowledged the accuracy of syntax and semantic properties of that language. This creates a context-specific aspect to the way babies develop one language over another.
In addition to Chomsky's universal theory about the acquisition of language, he believed that the optimal age to acquire language was between 3 and 10 years. Language acquisition does not need to be prompted. The child acquires language automatically. Being corrected with incorrect usages of words or grammar will not change the child's ability to correctly grasp the language. For example, a child will use geeses no matter how many times they are corrected to use geese. And he did not believe that there were socio-cultural differences in the stages in which language is acquired.
In 1957, Skinner published his book titled Verbal Behavior, which described in detail behaviorism theories of the processes in which we develop language. This book took him over 20 years to complete and is believed to be his most important contribution to the field of behaviorism.
In this book, Skinner's preliminary definition of language is behavior reinforced through the mediation of other persons who must be responding in ways which have been conditioned precisely in order to reinforce the behavior of the speaker. This definition indicates that Skinner believed verbal behavior is a form of social behavior.
He strongly believed that language was shaped and sustained by the verbal environment in which the learner is in, meaning that there is no innate system in our brain to acquire language. This has been coined as the blank slate or tabula rasa side of the debate.
As we know, Chomsky did not agree with Skinner's theory about language acquisition. He believed that language was too complex to be learned through the behaviorist's view of reinforcement alone. Because of the complexity of language, we must have an innate system in our brain predisposed to acquire it.
Chomsky sent an article that critiqued Skinner's book directly to Skinner in 1958. When Skinner received this, he did not read it. This was then published in the newspaper called the New York Review of Books by Chomsky in 1959, after he had privately sent the critique to Skinner. This became a famous review of Skinner's work.
I received a 55-page typewritten review by someone whom I had never heard of, named Noam Chomsky. I read half a dozen pages and saw that he had missed the point of my book and read no further. In 1959, I received a reprint from a journal called Language, reduced now to 32 pages in type, and so that it was the same review by this unknown character. And so I put it aside without reading it. Then, of course, Chomsky's star rose.
Chomsky quickly gained attention and support for his nativist theory, regardless of Skinner's accusations that he misunderstood his book.
This debate plotted nativism and behaviorism against one another about key aspect of development. This contributes to major theories of nature and nurture, which we have discussed this semester.
Francis Galton believed that we were born with DNA that determined personality traits to make up who we are. This is the first example of the nature aspect of development in which Chomsky reintegrates into his theory of language acquisition.
In contrast, John Locke believed in the blank slate or nurture aspect of development. He believed that the mind was born completely without any built-in knowledge and that one learns through experience and influence from parental guidance. This is the basis of Skinner's argument for the language acquisition.
This debate between Skinner and Chomsky perpetuated the nature versus nurture hypothesis regarding human development, but integrated a more interactive aspect between the two. Well, what do you think? Is there an answer?
Do we develop as a result of nature
or nurture?